The scream tore through the night before Kalen even reached the stable door. He was already running. His boots hit the frozen ground hard, his breath coming out in white clouds, his hand gripping the hilt of the blade at his side. Something was wrong. He could feel it in his bones, the same way he could feel a storm coming before the first drop of rain touched his skin. As the alpha of the Voss pack, his senses were sharper than any ordinary man's, and right now, every instinct in his body was screaming at him to move faster. He had been out for 3 days, patrolling the northern border with his men, chasing rumors of trespassers near Packland. The talks with the neighboring pack had turned sour weeks ago, and tension was thick enough to choke on. He hadn't slept properly in days. His shoulders ached, his eyes burned. But none of that mattered now, because there was a sound coming from the old stable at the edge of the estate, a sound that did not belong there. It was not a scream of alarm. It was something smaller, more broken, a whimper. Kalen slowed his pace as he neared the stable doors, his hand raised to signal the 2 guards behind him to stay back. The old stable had been empty for years, ever since the pack stopped keeping horses and switched to trucks and cars for hauling supplies. Nobody came out here anymore. Nobody had a reason to. He pushed the heavy wooden door open, and the smell hit him first. Damp hay, old wood, and underneath it, something else, something warm and alive. The moonlight spilled through a broken slat in the roof, falling across the stall in the far corner. And there, in the middle of a dirty blanket of straw, he saw them. A young woman lay curled on her side, her dark hair tangled and full of straw, her clothes torn at the sleeve and stained with dirt. She looked thin, too thin, her collarbone pressing sharply against pale skin. Her breathing was slow and even, asleep, not dead, not hurt in any way he could see from here, just asleep, as if she had crawled into this corner and simply given up the fight to stay awake. But it was the second shape beside her that made Kalen's entire body go still. A wolf, gray and brown, her fur matted with mud, her belly swollen and heavy with pups close to being born. She lay pressed against the woman's back, her head lifted, her amber eyes locked directly on Kalen the moment he stepped inside. She did not growl. She did not run. She simply watched him, her body angled protectively over the sleeping woman, as if daring him to come one step closer without a reason. Kalen had hunted wolves before. He had faced rogue shifters in battle, had stood his ground against alphas twice his size. He was not a man who scared easily, but something about the way this pregnant wolf looked at him, calm, intelligent, unafraid, sent a chill down his spine that had nothing to do with the cold night air. "Easy," he said quietly, lifting both hands where she could see them. "I'm not here to hurt her." The wolf's ears flicked at the sound of his voice, but her gaze did not waver. She let out a low sound, almost like a warning, almost like a question. Behind him, one of the guards, a broad-shouldered man named Callum, stepped into the doorway and froze at the sight. "Alpha," he whispered. "Is that—" "Stay there," Kalen said, cutting him off. He did not want sudden movement. He did not want anything that might startle either the wolf or the woman lying so still on the straw. He crouched down slowly, keeping his distance, studying the woman's face in the dim light. She could not be older than her early 20s. Her skin was pale, almost gray with exhaustion, and there were faint bruises along her wrist, the kind that came from being grabbed too hard, not once, but many times. Her lips were cracked from thirst. Whatever had happened to her, it had not been kind. He had seen desperate people before, refugees fleeing packs at war, runaways escaping abusive mates, lone wolves cast out with nowhere to go. But something about the scene in front of him did not fit the usual pattern. A pregnant wolf did not simply wander into a stranger's stable and lie down beside a sleeping human, unless there was a reason. Wolves protected their own kind, their pack, their pups. They did not guard humans out of nowhere. Unless this wasn't just any wolf. Kalen leaned in slightly, careful not to make any sudden moves, and studied the wolf's eyes again. There was something behind them, something that looked almost like understanding, like awareness, far beyond what any ordinary animal should have. He had met true wolves in his life, the kind that never shifted, that lived and died as animals. And he had met shifters in their wolf form, the kind whose human mind stayed sharp even beneath fur and claws. This wolf felt like the second kind. But if that was true, Then who was she? And why was she here, pregnant and alone, guarding a sleeping stranger in an abandoned stable in the middle of the night? "Sir," Callum said again from the doorway, his voice low and uneasy. "Should I call the healer?" Kaelin did not answer right away. His eyes moved from the wolf back to the sleeping woman. Her chest rose and fell steadily, but her face was pinched even in sleep, as though her dreams offered no comfort at all. There was dried blood on the hem of her skirt, not fresh, but old. Days old, perhaps. Her shoes were gone, her bare feet scratched and dirty, as if she had walked a long way without stopping. Whoever she was, whatever she had run from, she had chosen this stable, this pack's land, as the place to finally stop running. "Yes," Kaelin said finally, straightening up but keeping his voice quiet so as not to wake her. "Get Dr. Morella. Tell her it's urgent, but tell her to come alone. I don't want half the pack out here gossiping before we even know what's going on." Callum nodded and disappeared into the darkness, his footsteps fading quickly toward the main house. Kaelin turned his attention back to the stall, crouching low again, watching the wolf carefully. Her body remained tense, every muscle ready to react if he came too close. But she had not attacked, had not even snapped her teeth in warning. She was simply watching, weighing him, deciding whether he was a threat. "I mean her no harm," Kaelin said softly, more to the wolf than to himself. "You have my word." The wolf's ears twitched again, and for a long moment, the two of them simply stared at each other in the moonlit stall, predator to predator, protector to protector. Then, slowly, carefully, the wolf lowered her head just slightly, not in surrender, but in something closer to acknowledgement, as if she understood him, as if she was choosing, for now, to trust him. Kaelin felt something shift inside his chest, something he could not name. He had led his pack through battles, through political disputes with rival alphas, through years of carrying the weight of an entire community on his shoulders. He was not a man easily moved by strangers, and yet here he was, kneeling in the dirt of an old stable, feeling an inexplicable pull toward a woman he had never met, and a wolf, who seemed to be guarding her, like a mother guarding a child. He looked at the woman's face again. Even in exhaustion, even covered in dirt and bruises, there was something striking about her, a quiet strength carved into her features, as if she had survived more than her body should have been able to bear, and had done so without losing herself entirely. Minutes passed, before he heard footsteps approaching again, lighter this time, hurried. Dr. Morella appeared in the doorway, her silver hair pulled back in a hasty knot, a leather bag clutched in one hand. She stopped abruptly at the sight in front of her, her sharp eyes taking in the scene in an instant. "Alpha," she breathed. "What in the world?" "I don't know," Kaelin admitted, standing slowly, careful to keep his movements calm, for the wolf's sake. "I found them like this." The wolf hasn't moved from her side. Morella's gaze shifted to the pregnant wolf, and something in her expression sharpened, thoughtful and calculating. She had served the pack as its healer for over 20 years. She had seen shifters in every form, in every condition. Kaelin trusted her judgment more than almost anyone else's. "May I approach?" Morella asked, not to Kaelin, but to the wolf directly, her voice gentle and measured. The wolf's eyes flicked toward her, studying, and after a tense pause, the wolf shifted just enough to allow a small space, though she did not move far from the woman's side. Morella knelt down carefully, opening her bag with slow, deliberate movements, murmuring softly under her breath the entire time, the way one might speak to calm a frightened child. She checked the woman's pulse first, pressing 2 fingers gently against her wrist, then studied her breathing, her color, the state of her lips and skin. "She's severely dehydrated," Morella said quietly, "and exhausted beyond anything I've seen in a long while. But her body isn't injured beyond the bruising. Whatever happened to her, it wasn't recent violence. This is the damage of days, maybe weeks, of running and hiding without proper food or rest." Kaelin's jaw tightened. "Can you wake her?" "Not yet. Let her body rest a little longer. We'll move her inside, somewhere warm, and I'll begin treatment there." Morella glanced toward the wolf again, her brow furrowing. "As for this one, Alpha, I don't think she's simply an animal." Kaelin's chest tightened at hearing his own suspicion, confirmed by someone with far more experience than himself. "What makes you say that?" Morella reached out slowly, and to Kaylin's surprise, the wolf allowed her hand to rest gently against the side of her face. A touch of trust rarely given so freely by any wild creature, shifter or not. Her eyes, Mirella said softly. There's a clarity in them, a recognition. She understands every word we're saying. She's not simply protecting the girl out of instinct, she's protecting her out of loyalty. That kind of loyalty doesn't come from nowhere. Kaylin looked down at the wolf again, and this time, when their eyes met, he felt it clearly. An unmistakable intelligence staring back at him, patient and watchful, waiting to see what kind of man he truly was. We need to move them both inside, Kaylin said finally. Carefully. I don't want either of them frightened. Mirella nodded, already preparing a makeshift stretcher from a folded blanket. I'll need help lifting her. And Alpha, someone will need to carry the wolf as well, given her condition. She's close to giving birth. Days, maybe less. Kaylin glanced once more at the sleeping woman, her fragile frame curled protectively even in unconsciousness, and at the loyal, watchful wolf pressed against her side, guarding her even now, even exhausted and heavily pregnant herself. Whoever this woman was, whatever secrets she carried, whatever had driven her to collapse in an abandoned stable on his land, with a pregnant wolf as her only companion, Kaylin knew, without question, that he would not turn either of them away. He knelt down once more, gently gathering the sleeping woman into his arms, careful not to jostle her too roughly. She stirred faintly at the movement, a soft murmur escaping her lips, though her eyes remained closed. She weighed almost nothing, far too little for someone her height, and the realization only deepened the anger simmering quietly beneath his calm exterior. Someone had let this happen to her. Someone had driven her to this point of complete and total exhaustion. The wolf rose unsteadily to her feet, following close behind, as Kaylin carried the woman out of the stable and toward the warm lights of the pack house, glowing in the distance. She did not growl, did not resist, simply matched their pace, her amber eyes fixed on the woman in his arms the entire way, refusing to let her out of sight for even a single moment. As they crossed the frosted grounds beneath a sky full of stars, Kaylin found himself glancing down at the wolf walking steadily beside him, and could not shake the feeling that whatever story these two carried, it was only just beginning to unfold, and somehow, he had the distinct sense that his own life was about to change because of it. Behind them, the old stable stood silent once more, its broken door swinging gently in the night wind, as if it, too, understood that something important had just happened within its walls, something that would ripple far beyond that quiet, forgotten corner of the Vosspack's land. The pack house had never felt so tense. Kaylin carried the woman through the wide front doors, past startled members of his household staff, who froze mid-step at the sight of their Alpha cradling a stranger, while a heavily pregnant wolf trotted at his heels. Whispers followed him down the hallway, hushed and uncertain, but he ignored them all, his focus fixed entirely on reaching the guest chamber at the end of the east wing. He laid the woman down gently on the soft bed, pulling a thick quilt over her trembling body. Mirella moved quickly, setting up an intravenous line to begin rehydrating her, checking her temperature, murmuring instructions to the young healer's assistant who had rushed in behind them. The wolf leapt onto the foot of the bed without hesitation, curling herself protectively near the woman's legs, her head raised and alert, watching every person who entered the room with sharp, assessing eyes. She's not going to let anyone near without a fight, Mirella murmured, glancing toward the wolf with a mixture of caution and fascination. Not unless she trusts them. Kaylin crossed his arms, studying the scene before him. She trusted you quickly enough back in the stable. Because I moved slowly and spoke gently. Wolves respond to tone, to intention. But this one, Mirella's eyes narrowed thoughtfully. She's testing more than my movements. She's testing whether we mean this girl well or ill. That's not instinct, Alpha. That's judgment. The words settled uncomfortably in Kaylin's chest. He had led the Vosspack for nearly 6 years, since his father passed the mantle down to him at the age of 25. In that time, he had faced betrayal from within his own ranks, negotiated fragile peace with rival packs, and buried friends lost to territory disputes that spiraled out of control. He considered himself a good judge of danger, and every instinct he possessed told him that this wolf, whatever she truly was, meant no harm to his pack. But he also could not shake the feeling that her presence here was not accidental. By late morning, word had spread through the entire estate. Pack members gathered in small clusters near the dining hall and the training grounds, trading theories in low voices. Some believed the woman was a spy, sent by a rival pack to gather information under the guise of weakness. Others believed she was a rogue wolf shifter fleeing persecution, dangerous and unpredictable. A few, more sympathetic, simply believed she was a lost soul who needed help. Kalen's second in command, a stern, broad-shouldered man named Garrick, cornered him in the hallway outside the guest chamber shortly after noon. "Alpha, I understand your instinct to help," Garrick said carefully, keeping his voice low. "But we know nothing about this woman, nothing about where she came from, why she was hiding in our stable, or what connection she has to that wolf. Bringing a stranger into the heart of our territory during a time of tension with our neighbors is not a decision to be made lightly." "I'm aware of the risks, Garrick," Kalen replied evenly, "but I am not in the habit of leaving the vulnerable to suffer when I have the power to help them." She was starving, exhausted, alone except for an animal that clearly would have died protecting her if it came to that. "I will not turn my back on that kind of loyalty, animal or not." Garrick's jaw tightened, but he said nothing further, simply nodding once before turning to continue his rounds. Kalen understood his concerns were not unreasonable. A pack under threat needed caution above all else. But something about turning this woman away, sending her back out into whatever danger she had been running from, felt fundamentally wrong to him, a violation of the very principles he had sworn to uphold as Alpha. By early afternoon, the wolf's condition began to shift. She grew restless, pacing small circles at the foot of the bed, her breathing quickening, occasional low whimpers escaping her throat. Morella noticed immediately, setting aside her work with the sleeping woman to examine the wolf more closely. "She's close," Morella said, her brow furrowed with concern. "Days, I thought earlier, but I believe I was wrong. This could happen within hours." Kalen felt a fresh wave of unease settle over him. A pregnant wolf giving birth alone, without her own pack to support her, was already a precarious situation. Add to that the stress of an unfamiliar environment, and the risks multiplied considerably. "What does she need?" he asked. "A quiet, warm space, privacy if possible, and ideally, someone she trusts present, to help ground her through the delivery." Morella glanced toward Kalen, her expression thoughtful. "But given the circumstances, I suspect she considers the girl on that bed to be exactly that source of comfort." Kalen looked toward the sleeping woman, still unconscious despite the commotion unfolding at the foot of her bed. Her presence alone seemed to be the only thing keeping the wolf calm, an invisible thread connecting the two of them that defied every explanation he could think of. "Prepare what you need," Kalen said finally. "I'll have the room cleared of anyone unnecessary. Whatever she needs to get through this safely, she'll have it." As the afternoon stretched into evening, Kalen found himself unable to focus on the mountain of pack business waiting for his attention. Reports from the northern border, requests from pack members regarding upcoming supply shipments, an urgent message from a neighboring Alpha requesting a formal meeting, all of it sat untouched on his desk, while his mind remained fixed on the two strangers resting in his guest chamber. He returned to check on them just as the sun began to set, casting long orange shadows across the room. The woman remained unconscious, though her color had improved slightly thanks to the fluids Morella had administered throughout the day. The wolf, however, had grown noticeably more restless, her breathing labored, her body curling and uncurling in obvious discomfort. "It's beginning," Morella said quietly from her chair beside the bed. "The birth will likely happen within the hour." Kalen remained near the doorway, unwilling to leave despite having no real role to play in what was about to unfold. Something about the scene held him in place, a strange sense of responsibility toward these two creatures who had wandered into his life so unexpectedly. As the first labored contraction gripped the wolf's body, something remarkable happened. The sleeping woman's brow furrowed, her breathing hitching sharply, as though she too felt a wave of pain despite remaining unconscious. Morella's eyes widened in alarm, quickly checking the woman's vitals, finding her heart rate elevated, her body tense despite her continued unconsciousness. "What in the world?" Morella whispered, glancing between the two of them with growing confusion. Kalen stepped closer, his own instincts screaming that something far beyond ordinary coincidence was unfolding in front of him. As the wolf's contractions intensified, so too did the subtle, unconscious reactions rippling through the sleeping woman's body, her fingers curling into the sheets, her breath catching in rhythm with the wolf's labored panting. "They're connected," Kalen said slowly, almost to himself. "Somehow, whatever is happening to her is happening to the woman as well." Mirella did not answer immediately, too focused on managing the delicate birth unfolding before them, but the tightness in her expression told Kalen she shared his growing unease. Whatever bond existed between this woman and this wolf, it was far deeper, far more complicated than a simple case of a lost animal finding comfort beside a sleeping stranger. The first pup arrived, just as the last light faded from the sky outside, small and slick and trembling, immediately nuzzled into place by its exhausted mother despite her own obvious pain. A second followed shortly after, then a third. Each arrival met with a fresh wave of subtle, unconscious distress, rippling through the sleeping woman on the bed beside them. By the time the fourth and final pup arrived, the wolf lay utterly spent, her sides heaving, her 4 newborn pups already nursing weakly against her belly. And in that same moment, as if some invisible tether between them had finally loosened, the woman's tense body relaxed entirely, her breathing evening out into something calmer, deeper, more peaceful than it had been since Kalen first found her in the stable. Mirella sat back slowly, wiping her hands on a clean cloth, her expression a mixture of exhaustion and profound bewilderment. "I have delivered countless pups in my years as this pack's healer," she said quietly, "but I have never seen anything like what just happened here." Kalen remained silent for a long moment, staring at the peaceful scene before him, the exhausted mother wolf curled protectively around her newborn pups, the sleeping woman finally resting without the tension that had gripped her body throughout the ordeal. "Whoever she is," he said finally, his voice low and thoughtful, "she is not simply a stranger who wandered onto our land by chance. There is something far greater happening here, something none of us fully understand yet." Mirella nodded slowly, her sharp eyes moving between the woman and the wolf. "Then I suppose, Alpha, we have no choice but to wait for her to wake and tell us herself." Kalen glanced toward the window, where the last traces of daylight had disappeared completely, replaced by a sky full of distant stars. Somewhere out there, whatever danger had driven this woman to collapse in his stable still lingered, waiting, patient, unseen. And he found himself more determined than ever to uncover the truth before that danger found its way to his door. He stayed in the room long after Mirella retired for the night, watching over the sleeping woman and her small, exhausted wolf family, his mind turning over question after question, with no clear answers in sight. Whoever this woman was, whatever secrets she carried within her, one thing had become abundantly clear to him over the course of this long, strange day. Her fate, and the fate of the loyal creature who had guarded her so fiercely, was now inextricably tied to his own. She woke to the sound of soft breathing that was not her own. For a long moment, the young woman lay perfectly still, her eyes closed, trying to make sense of the warmth surrounding her, the softness beneath her body, so different from the cold, hard ground she had grown used to sleeping on. Her mind moved slowly, sluggishly, piecing together fragments of memory that refused to line up in any clear order. Running, cold rain, the smell of wet straw, and then darkness. When she finally opened her eyes, the unfamiliar ceiling above her sent a jolt of panic straight through her chest. She sat up too quickly, her head spinning, her hands gripping the edges of a soft blanket that did not belong to her. "Easy now," a calm voice said from nearby. "You're safe. No one here means you harm." Her eyes snapped toward the voice, finding a silver-haired woman seated in a chair beside the bed, her expression gentle but watchful. The young woman's breathing quickened, her gaze darting around the unfamiliar room, taking in the tall windows, the carved wooden furniture, the warm fire crackling in a stone hearth across the room. This was no stable, no forest, no hiding place. Then she felt it, movement near her legs, and looked down to find her wolf curled contentedly at the foot of the bed. 4 tiny pups nestled against her belly, nursing peacefully. "Luna," the woman whispered, relief flooding through her chest so suddenly that tears sprang unbidden to her eyes. She reached down instinctively, running her fingers through the wolf's fur, and Luna's tail thumped softly against the blanket in response, her amber eyes opening briefly to meet her companion's gaze, before drifting closed again in exhaustion. "She had her pups yesterday evening," the silver-haired woman said gently. "All 4 of them are healthy. She's simply tired now, as any new mother would be." The young woman's mind raced, trying to piece together how much time had passed, how she had gone from running through the woods to waking up in this warm, unfamiliar room. "Where am I?" she asked, her voice hoarse and unfamiliar, even to her own ears. "You're in the territory of the Voss Pack," the woman replied. "My name is Morella. I'm the healer here. Our Alpha found you asleep in one of our old stables 2 nights ago, with your wolf standing guard beside you. He brought you here so we could care for you properly." The mention of an Alpha sent a fresh wave of fear rippling through her body, old instincts flaring immediately to life. She pulled the blanket tighter around herself, her eyes scanning the room again, as though searching for an exit, a way to escape, before whatever danger she imagined might arrive. Morella noticed the shift instantly, her voice softening further. "You have nothing to fear here, I promise you that. Whatever happened to bring you to our land, our Alpha has no intention of causing you harm. If he did, he would not have carried you inside himself, nor sat beside your bed, long into the night, watching over you and your wolf." The young woman said nothing, her guarded eyes flicking between the healer and the door, her body tense despite the comfort surrounding her. Trust did not come easily anymore. It had been beaten out of her, slowly, methodically, over years she preferred not to think about. A soft knock sounded at the door before it opened, and a tall man stepped inside, broad-shouldered and commanding, with sharp green eyes that immediately found hers across the room. She recognized him instantly, though she had no memory of seeing his face before, some deep instinctive part of her recognizing the unmistakable presence of an Alpha the moment he entered. Her body stiffened, every muscle coiling tight with old, familiar fear. "You're awake," he said simply, his voice low and steady, making no move to come closer, keeping a respectful distance near the doorway instead. "I'm glad. We were worried." She said nothing, her wary eyes fixed on him, waiting for the mask of kindness to slip, waiting for the cruelty she had learned to expect from men who held power over others. "My name is Kaelin," he continued, when her silence stretched on. "I lead this pack. You're safe here, and so is your wolf and her pups. No one will hurt you while you're under my protection." "Why?" The word slipped out before she could stop it, sharp and suspicious. "Why would you protect a stranger you know nothing about?" Kaelin's expression did not waver. "Because I found you starving and exhausted, guarded fiercely by a pregnant wolf who refused to leave your side even in her own moment of vulnerability. That kind of loyalty tells me something important about the person it's given to. I don't need to know your entire story to know that you deserve help, not harm." Something in his steady, unwavering tone chipped slightly at the wall of suspicion she had built around herself, though she remained cautious, unwilling to lower her guard completely. She had heard kind words before, promises of safety that had turned to ash the moment she believed them. "What's your name?" Kaelin asked gently, when she offered nothing further. She hesitated for a long moment, weighing whether even that small piece of information was safe to share. Finally, quietly, she answered, "Elira." "Elira," Kaelin repeated, as though testing the weight of the name. "And your wolf?" "Luna," she said, glancing down at the sleeping creature and her 4 pups with visible affection, the first genuine emotion crossing her face since she had woken. "She's been with me for a long time." "How long?" Morella asked gently, curiosity evident in her tone. Elira's gaze grew distant, memories flickering behind her eyes that she clearly did not wish to revisit. "Longer than I can properly explain," she said finally, her voice guarded once more. Kaelin studied her carefully, noting the way her hand remained protectively near Luna even as they spoke, the way her eyes darted repeatedly toward the door, as though calculating distance and escape routes even now, safe and warm in his own home. Whatever had happened to her, it had left scars far deeper than the faint bruises still visible along her wrists. "You don't have to tell us anything you're not ready to share," Kaelin said finally, his tone gentle but firm. "But I want you to understand something clearly. You are not a prisoner here. You are not obligated to explain yourself, nor to stay a moment longer than you wish. But while you remain under this roof, you and your wolf will be protected, fed, and cared for, without condition." Elira's guarded eyes studied him for a long, silent moment, searching his face for the deception she had learned to expect from those in positions of power, but she found none, only steady, unwavering sincerity that unsettled her more than outright hostility would have. "Why would you offer that to someone you don't even know?" she asked again, her voice quieter this time, less accusatory and more genuinely bewildered. Because it's the right thing to do, Kaylin said simply, and because I don't believe in turning away those who need help, regardless of what brought them to my door. The room fell into a thoughtful silence, broken only by the soft, contented sounds of Luna and her pups nursing peacefully at the foot of the bed. Elira's fingers curled tighter around the edge of her blanket, her mind clearly racing through possibilities, weighing risks and dangers that neither Kaylin nor Morella could fully understand. I need to eat, she said finally, quietly, an admission that seemed to cost her more pride than it should have. And Luna will need food too, now that she's nursing. Of course, Morella said quickly, rising from her chair. I'll have something brought up right away. Broth first, to ease your stomach back into eating properly, and then something more substantial once you've kept that down. As Morella hurried from the room, Kaylin remained near the doorway, watching Elira carefully, noting the way her shoulders remained tense despite the small progress they had made. He understood, without needing further explanation, that trust would not come easily from her, that whatever had happened before she arrived at his stable had taught her harsh lessons about the true nature of those who claimed to offer protection. Take your time, he said quietly, before turning to leave. There's no rush for answers. Rest, eat, and heal. The rest can wait until you're ready. He closed the door softly behind him, leaving Elira alone once more, with her sleeping wolf and newborn pups, the silence of the room settling around her like a heavy blanket. She glanced down at Luna, running gentle fingers through her fur, drawing comfort from the familiar warmth of her only true companion through everything she had endured. What do you think? She whispered softly, more to herself than to the sleeping wolf. Is this place different? Luna's ear twitched faintly at the sound of her voice, though she did not wake, her exhausted body finally allowing itself the deep, uninterrupted rest it desperately needed. Elira watched her for a long moment, memories of the long, painful road that had brought them here, flickering unwelcome through her mind, memories of cruelty and betrayal she had worked so hard to outrun. She did not yet know if this new place, this pack led by a man whose eyes held more sincerity than she had encountered in years, would prove to be the safety she desperately sought, or simply another danger wearing a kinder mask. But for the first time in longer than she cared to admit, exhausted and finally fed, surrounded by warmth instead of cold, Elira allowed herself the smallest, most fragile flicker of hope. Perhaps, just perhaps, her long and painful road had finally led her somewhere safe. 3 days passed before Elira left the guest chamber for the first time. She moved slowly through the wide corridors of the pack house, her steps hesitant, her eyes constantly scanning her surroundings the way someone accustomed to danger always did. Luna walked close beside her, her 4 pups left safely tucked in a warm basket near the fire under the watchful eye of one of the household staff, a kind older woman named Della, who had taken an immediate liking to the tiny creatures. Word of the strange woman staying in the Alpha's guest chamber had spread through every corner of the estate by now, and Elira could feel curious eyes following her wherever she walked, whispered conversations falling silent the moment she passed. She kept her chin lifted despite the discomfort, refusing to let anyone see how deeply their scrutiny unsettled her. She found Kaylin in a wide, sunlit study near the back of the house, bent over a stack of papers at his desk, his brow furrowed in concentration. He looked up the moment she appeared in the doorway, setting his pen down immediately, giving her his full attention. Elira, he said, rising from his chair, I'm glad to see you up and moving. I wanted to thank you, she said quietly, standing stiffly near the doorway. Luna pressed against her leg for reassurance. For everything you've done, the food, the care, allowing Luna to have her pups somewhere safe. I know none of this was owed to me. You don't need to thank me, Kaylin replied gently. Anyone in my position would have done the same. I doubt that, Elira said, a note of quiet bitterness slipping into her voice before she could stop it. Most alphas I've known would have seen an unfamiliar wolf and stranger on their land as a threat to eliminate, not a responsibility to protect. Kaylin's expression sharpened slightly at the comment, curiosity and concern both flickering behind his green eyes. You've had experience with alphas who behave that way? Elira's gaze dropped briefly, old memories rising unbidden before she forced them back down. I've had experience with many things, she said carefully, deflecting the question without answering it directly. Kaylin did not push further, sensing the fragile boundary she had drawn around herself, respecting it despite his obvious curiosity. Instead, he gestured toward a chair near the window. "Please, sit. You look tired still. Would you like something to drink?" Elira hesitated only briefly before accepting the offer, settling carefully into the chair, Luna curling contentedly at her feet the moment she sat down. Kaelin poured a cup of warm tea from a kettle resting near the fireplace, setting it gently on the small table beside her, before returning to his own seat. "Can I ask you something?" he said after a moment of comfortable silence. Elira's shoulders tensed slightly, but she nodded. "Luna, Lorna," Kaelin said carefully, glancing toward the wolf resting peacefully at her feet. "She's not simply a tame animal, is she? There's something different about her, something our healer noticed the very first night we found you both in the stable." Elira's fingers tightened slightly around the warm cup in her hands, her eyes flickering down toward Luna, with an expression that mixed affection with something far more complicated, something close to sorrow. "No," she admitted quietly. "She's not simply an animal." "Then what is she?" Elira was quiet for a long moment, clearly weighing how much of the truth she was willing to share. "She's family," she said finally, her voice soft but firm. "More family to me than anyone else I've known in years. I can't fully explain what she is, not yet. Not without explaining things I'm not ready to speak about. But I promise you, Kaelin, she means your pack no harm. She has only ever protected, never harmed." Kaelin studied her carefully, noting the raw honesty behind her words despite the careful boundaries she maintained around the deeper truth. "I believe you," he said simply. "I saw the way she guarded you in that stable, weak and exhausted from her own condition, still refusing to let anyone near without proving their intentions first. That kind of loyalty isn't something easily faked." Something in Elira's guarded expression softened slightly at his words, a flicker of gratitude crossing her tired features. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for not pushing me to explain everything before I'm ready." "You've clearly been through something difficult," Kaelin said gently. "I won't pretend to understand what, not yet. But I've led this pack long enough to recognize the weight someone carries when they've survived something they'd rather forget. You don't owe me your story, Elira. Not until you're ready to tell it." Elira's eyes lifted to meet his, searching his face once more for any hint of the deception she had learned to fear, and once again finding none, only patient, steady sincerity that both comforted and unsettled her in equal measure. Over the following days, a quiet rhythm began to settle between them. Elira slowly grew more comfortable moving through the pack house, spending time in the gardens with Luna and the pups, occasionally sharing quiet conversations with Kaelin in the evenings, after his pack duties concluded for the day. She remained guarded about her past, offering only small, careful fragments when questions arose, but she found herself, against every instinct that warned her not to, slowly beginning to trust the strange kindness surrounding her. One evening, nearly a week after her arrival, Elira sat quietly on a bench near the garden's edge, watching Luna's pups tumble clumsily over one another in the soft evening grass. Kaelin approached from the house, settling onto the bench beside her without invitation, though she did not object. "They're growing quickly," he observed, watching the pups with a small, genuine smile. "They are," Elira agreed softly, a rare, unguarded smile of her own crossing her face as she watched the tiny creatures play. "Luna would be proud, if wolves understood pride the way we do." "Perhaps she does," Kaelin said thoughtfully. "I've come to believe there's more intelligence and understanding in her than most people would assume." Elira's smile faded slightly, replaced by a more thoughtful expression. "You're not wrong about that," she said quietly, though she offered nothing further. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the pups play, as the sun began to set behind the distant tree line, painting the sky in soft shades of orange and pink. Kaelin glanced sideways at Elira, studying the quiet peace settling gradually over her tired features, so different from the guarded fear she had carried since the moment she first woke in his home. "Elira," he said softly, breaking the silence. "Whatever it is you're running from, whoever hurt you before you found your way to my land, I want you to know that you have a place here for as long as you need it. No conditions, no expectations, just safety, for as long as you require it." Elira's eyes glistened faintly in the fading evening light, emotion rising unexpectedly at the unfamiliar kindness of his words. "Why does it matter to you so much?" she asked quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. "What I need, what happens to me. You barely know me." Kalen considered the question carefully before answering, his gaze steady and sincere. "Because from the moment I found you in that stable, guarded by a loyal creature who clearly loved you enough to risk everything protecting you, I understood you were someone worth protecting. That hasn't changed since, and I don't expect it to." Illyra said nothing for a long moment, her throat tight with emotions she had not allowed herself to feel in years. Gratitude and disbelief tangled together with a small, fragile seed of hope she was almost afraid to acknowledge. Finally, quietly, she allowed herself to lean back against the bench, watching the pups play in the fading light, beside the man who had, against every instinct warning her otherwise, slowly begun to earn her trust. Whatever storm still waited for her beyond the safety of these walls, for the first time in longer than she could remember, Illyra allowed herself to believe that perhaps, here, she had finally found somewhere worth staying. The nightmare came again, on the 10th night. Illyra woke gasping, her body drenched in sweat, her heart pounding so violently she could feel it against her ribs. The dream clung to her, even as her eyes adjusted to the darkness of her room, fragments of memory bleeding into reality. A burning village, harsh voices, hands gripping her arms too tightly to escape. Luna stirred immediately beside her, sensing her distress even in sleep, pressing close against her side with a soft, comforting whine. Illyra wrapped an arm around the wolf's neck, burying her face against soft fur, willing her racing heart to slow. Outside her door, Kalen paused mid-step on his way toward his own chambers, having stayed later than usual reviewing reports in his study. He had grown accustomed to occasionally hearing quiet, distressed sounds from Illyra's room during the late hours, evidence of nightmares she never spoke of during daylight. But tonight, the sound of her ragged breathing seemed sharper, more urgent than before. He knocked softly. "Illyra? Are you all right?" A long pause followed, before her voice answered, quiet and shaken. "I'm fine. Just a bad dream." Kalen hesitated outside the door, torn between respecting her privacy and the growing concern gnawing at his chest. "May I come in? Only if you'd like the company." Another pause, longer this time, before the door opened slightly, revealing Illyra's pale, shaken face in the dim candlelight. She stepped back silently, allowing him entry, and he moved into the room carefully, taking a seat in the chair near her bed, without presuming to come any closer. "You don't have to talk about it," he said gently, "but I'm here, if you want to." Illyra sat back down on the edge of her bed, Luna curling protectively against her side once more, and for a long moment, she said nothing at all, simply staring at her hands folded in her lap. "There was a village," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "Where I grew up, it burned, a long time ago, because of decisions made by people far more powerful than I was. I lost people I loved that night, and the pack I turned to afterward for protection." Her voice tightened, old pain bleeding through despite her efforts to stay composed. "They were not the protectors I hoped they would be." Kalen remained silent, giving her the space to continue at her own pace, understanding instinctively that pushing for more would only cause her to retreat further behind the walls she had built. "The Alpha who took me in," Illyra continued quietly, "made promises of safety, of belonging. For a while I believed him, but eventually I learned that his kindness had conditions attached, conditions I was not willing to accept." Her hands trembled slightly in her lap. "When I refused what he demanded of me, he made it clear that my safety and my usefulness to his pack were the very same thing. When I was no longer useful to him in the way he wanted, I became nothing more than an inconvenience to be discarded, or worse." "Illyra," Kalen said softly, his voice carrying a quiet, restrained anger on her behalf. "What did he demand of you?" She was quiet for a long time, her fingers twisting nervously in Luna's fur, before she finally answered, her voice barely audible.
"He wanted me to bear pups for his bloodline. Not out of love or partnership, but purely for the strength it would bring his lineage."
"When I refused, when I ran, instead of submitting to his plans, he made sure I understood there would be consequences for my defiance." Kalen's jaw tightened, fury simmering quietly beneath his controlled exterior, though he kept his voice gentle, careful not to let his anger frighten her further. "That was never a request he had any right to make," he said firmly. "No one has that right over another person, regardless of rank or power." "I know that now," Illyra said quietly. but knowing it and escaping it are very different things. Her gaze drifted toward Luna, resting protectively against her side. Luna found me shortly after I ran. I don't fully understand how or why, but she's been with me ever since, protecting me, guiding me away from danger more times than I can count. I owe her my life, many times over. Kaelin studied the wolf carefully, understanding now with far greater clarity the depth of loyalty and protection he had witnessed the very first night he found them both in his stable. She's remarkable, he said quietly, as are you, for surviving everything you have and still choosing to trust again, even a little. Elira's eyes lifted to meet his, vulnerability and gratitude mingling openly in her tired gaze. I wasn't sure I could trust anyone again, she admitted softly. Not after everything. But you've shown me nothing but kindness since the moment you found me, without asking for anything in return. That's rare, Kaelin. Rarer than you probably realize. You deserve far more than rare kindness, Elira, Kaelin said quietly, his voice carrying a warmth that made her breath catch unexpectedly in her throat. You deserve safety, respect, and the freedom to choose your own path, without fear of what might happen if you refuse someone else's demands. They sat together in comfortable silence for a long while after that, the tension gradually easing from Elira's shoulders as the nightmare's grip loosened, replaced instead by the quiet comfort of no longer carrying her burden entirely alone. Luna's steady breathing beside her, and Kaelin's calm, steady presence nearby, slowly lulled her back toward a sense of safety she had not felt in longer than she could remember. Thank you, she whispered eventually, for listening, for not judging me for what happened, or what I couldn't prevent. There's nothing to judge, Kaelin said firmly. You survived cruelty that should never have been inflicted on you in the first place. That makes you strong, Elira, not weak. She offered him a small, tired smile, the first true smile he had seen from her since her arrival. Fragile but genuine. I'm grateful you found me, she admitted quietly. More grateful than I know how to properly express. You don't need to express it, Kaelin replied gently, rising from his chair as her breathing finally began to even out with exhaustion. Just rest now. You're safe here, Elira. That much I promise you. As he moved toward the door, Elira's quiet voice stopped him. Kaelin? He turned back toward her. The pack that hurt me, she said carefully, hesitation clear in her tone. They may still be searching for me. I don't know how far their reach extends, or how much danger my presence here might bring to your people. Kaelin's expression hardened slightly, though his voice remained steady and reassuring. Let me worry about that. Whatever danger follows you here, my pack and I are more than capable of handling it. You are under my protection now, Elira, and that is not something I take lightly. She nodded slowly, though the worry did not fully leave her eyes, an unshakable awareness that the past she had fled from might not be finished with her yet, no matter how far she had run, or how safe this new home had begun to feel. Kaelin left her room quietly, closing the door softly behind him, his mind turning over the weight of everything she had shared. Whatever pack had wronged her so deeply, whoever had made her believe her worth was measured only by her usefulness to someone else's ambitions, they would answer for it, should they ever dare show themselves on his land. He walked slowly back toward his own chambers, beneath the quiet, star-filled sky, more determined than ever to ensure that Elira and the loyal wolf, who had saved her life more times than either of them could count, would never again have reason to fear the kind of cruelty she had barely survived. The messenger arrived at dawn, breathless and travel-worn, demanding immediate audience with the Alpha. Kaelin received him in the main hall, flanked by Garrick and two senior warriors, his expression calm, despite the tension rippling through the room, the moment the messenger delivered his news. The Draymore pack, longtime rivals whose territory bordered the Voss lands to the east, had learned of Elira's presence within Voss borders, and their Alpha, a man named Corvin Draymore, was demanding her immediate return. He claims she is a fugitive, the messenger said, his voice tight with the discomfort of delivering unwelcome news. A thief who stole valuable pack property before fleeing. He demands her return within 3 days, or he will consider it an act of war against his territory. Kaelin's expression darkened, fury simmering just beneath his controlled exterior. Property, he repeated coldly. Is that truly the word he used? The messenger nodded uncomfortably. His exact words, Alpha. Garrick stepped forward, his own expression grim. This complicates matters significantly. Draymore has been searching for any excuse to test our borders for months now. If he believes this woman gives him legitimate cause. There is no legitimate cause, Kaelin interrupted sharply. A person is not property, regardless of what claims Corvin Draymore wishes to make. Illyra is under my protection, and I have no intention of surrendering her to a man who clearly sees her only as a possession to reclaim. The messenger shifted uncomfortably. Alpha, with respect, refusing his demand may provoke exactly the conflict you've worked so hard to avoid. Then conflict it will be, Kaelin said firmly, because I will not sacrifice an innocent woman's safety to preserve a fragile peace with a man who clearly has no honor to begin with. News of the ultimatum spread quickly through the pack house, and by midday, Illyra had heard enough fragments of conversation to understand precisely what had happened. She found Kaelin alone in his study that afternoon, her face pale with fear and guilt in equal measure. I heard what Corvin is demanding, she said quietly, standing stiffly near the doorway. You should give me back to him, Kaelin. I won't let your pack go to war because of me. Absolutely not, Kaelin said firmly, rising immediately from his desk. I will not hand you over to a man who tortured you, who tried to reduce you to nothing more than breeding property for his own ambitions. That is not a negotiation I am willing to entertain. But your people, Illyra protested, her voice tight with worry. If Draymore attacks because of me, then we will be ready for him, Kaelin said, his tone unwavering. Illyra, listen to me carefully. This is not your fault. The blame for whatever conflict follows lies entirely with Corvin Draymore, not with you. You did nothing wrong by seeking safety after fleeing cruelty. I will not allow his threats to change my decision to protect you. Illyra's eyes glistened with unshed tears, overwhelmed by the fierce protectiveness in his voice, so different from anything she had experienced from those who claimed authority over her before. Why would you risk your entire pack for someone you barely know? She asked softly. Because it's the right thing to do, Kaelin said simply, echoing words he had spoken to her once before. And because somewhere along these past weeks, Illyra, you've become far more than a stranger to me. The admission hung heavy in the air between them, and for a long moment, neither spoke, the weight of unspoken feelings settling quietly into the space separating them. Illyra's breath caught, uncertain how to respond to the vulnerability in his words. But before she could find her voice, Garrick's urgent knock interrupted the moment. Alpha, Garrick said, stepping into the room with visible tension etched across his face. Scouts report movement along the eastern border. Draymore forces, gathering in greater numbers than a simple show of intimidation would require. Kaelin's expression hardened instantly, the softness of moments before replaced by the sharp focus of an alpha preparing for conflict. How many? Enough to suggest he intends more than posturing, Garrick replied grimly. If he moves before the 3 days he demanded have passed, we need to be ready regardless. Then we prepare immediately, Kaelin said firmly, already moving toward the door. Double the border patrols, ready every able fighter. I will not be caught unprepared. As Kaelin moved to follow Garrick out, Illyra caught his arm, stopping him briefly. Kaelin, please, let me go to him. Talk to him myself. Perhaps I can convince him to withdraw without bloodshed. No, Kaelin said immediately, firmly, turning to meet her eyes directly. You will not go anywhere near that man again, Illyra. I understand your fear for my pack's safety, but placing yourself back into his hands is not a solution I will ever accept. But if there's a chance to avoid a battle, there is no chance, Kaelin said, his voice softening slightly despite the urgency of the moment. Men like Corvin Draymore do not relent because someone pleads with them. They relent when they understand the cost of their actions will be too great to bear. That is the only language he will listen to. Illyra fell silent, understanding the truth in his words even as fear for the pack that had shown her such unexpected kindness gnawed persistently at her chest. Then let me help however I can, she said finally. I won't simply hide while others fight because of me. Kaelin studied her for a long moment, torn between his instinct to protect her from any further danger and his growing respect for her fierce, unwavering resolve. You can help Morella prepare the medical supplies, he said finally, and you can stay close to the house, where our warriors can protect you, if the situation escalates. That is the extent of what I am willing to allow, Illyra. Your safety remains my priority above all else. She nodded reluctantly, understanding she would gain no further concession from him on the matter. As Kaelin moved quickly toward the door once more, Illyra called out one final time. "Kaelin." He paused, glancing back. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for choosing to protect me, even knowing the cost it might bring." "There was never truly a choice to make," Kaelin replied simply, before disappearing through the doorway to prepare his pack for whatever conflict awaited them at the eastern border. Left alone in the quiet study, Illyra sank slowly into the nearest chair, Luna padding softly to her side, resting her head comfortingly against her knee. Outside the windows, the sounds of the packhouse shifted rapidly from routine calm into the organized urgency of preparation for battle, voices calling out orders, the distant clash of practice weapons as warriors readied themselves for whatever confrontation loomed on the horizon. Illyra closed her eyes, running gentle fingers through Luna's fur, silently praying that whatever came next would not cost this newfound home, and the man who had shown her such unexpected kindness, more than either of them could bear to lose. The following 2 days passed in a blur of tense preparation. Warriors trained relentlessly on the grounds outside the packhouse, sharpening blades and rehearsing formations under Garrick's watchful direction. Scouts moved constantly along the border, tracking Draymore's movements with careful precision, reporting back hourly on the growing number of fighters gathering just beyond Voss territory. Illyra spent her days assisting Morella in the healing wing, organizing bandages, preparing salves, and learning quickly under the older woman's patient instruction. The work gave her hands something useful to do, a distraction from the anxious knot tightening in her stomach with each passing hour. Luna remained close by throughout, her pups now old enough to toddle unsteadily around the healing wing, providing small, unexpected moments of lightness amid the mounting tension. On the evening before the ultimatum's deadline, Illyra found herself unable to sleep, restless with worry, and made her way quietly to the training grounds, where Kaelin remained long after most others had retired for the night, reviewing battle formations by lantern light with a small group of his most trusted warriors. She watched from a distance for a while, observing the quiet confidence with which he commanded the space, his warriors clearly respecting him, not out of fear, but genuine loyalty earned through years of fair, steady leadership. When the group finally dispersed for the night, she approached him slowly. "You should be resting," Kaelin said gently, noticing her approach. "Tomorrow may bring difficult news, not with everything hanging over us." Kaelin set down the map he had been studying, giving her his full attention. "Are you frightened?" "Terrified," she admitted honestly. "Not for myself. I've faced Corvin's cruelty before and survived it. But for your people, Kaelin, for you. I couldn't bear it if harm came to any of you because of decisions made about my life before I ever arrived here. None of this is your burden to carry, Illyra," Kaelin said firmly, closing the distance between them slightly. "Corvin Draymore made his own choices long before you ever fled his territory. Whatever consequences follow from his cruelty are his responsibility, not yours." Illyra's eyes lifted to meet his in the soft lantern light, vulnerability and gratitude mingling openly in her gaze. "I never expected to find this kind of loyalty from anyone again," she said quietly. "Especially not from someone I had only just met. Perhaps some connections simply happen faster than we expect," Kaelin said softly, his voice carrying an unmistakable warmth that made her breath catch. Before either of them could speak further, a sharp horn sounded from the eastern watchtower, cutting urgently through the quiet night air. Galen's expression shifted instantly, sharp focus replacing the soft warmth of moments before. "That's the signal," he said grimly. "They're moving early." He turned immediately, calling out orders to nearby warriors as the packhouse erupted into organized chaos around them. Fighters rushing toward the eastern border, defensive positions being called into formation with practiced efficiency. Illyra felt her heart pounding violently as Kaelin turned back to her briefly. "Stay inside with Morella," he said firmly. "Please, Illyra, promise me you'll stay safe." "Kaelin, promise me," he repeated, his eyes intense with a mixture of urgency and something far softer beneath it. "I promise," she said finally, though her chest ached with fear for what awaited him beyond the walls of the packhouse. Kaelin reached out briefly, his hand cupping her cheek in a gesture far more intimate than either of them had shared before. "Whatever happens tonight," he said quietly, "know that protecting you was never a burden, Illyra. It was, and remains, an honor." Before she could respond, he turned and disappeared into the organized chaos of warriors preparing to defend the eastern border, leaving Alira standing alone in the darkness, her cheek still warm from his touch, her heart torn between fear and a feeling she had not allowed herself to acknowledge until this very moment. She made her way quickly back toward the healing wing, finding Morella already preparing supplies with brisk efficiency, other healers moving swiftly around the room readying bandages, salves, and stretchers for whatever wounded might soon arrive. "They've moved early," Alira said, her voice tight with worry. "I heard the horn," Morella replied grimly, not pausing her preparations. "Come. We'll need every capable hand ready." Alira threw herself into the work, grateful for anything to occupy her racing mind, as the distant sounds of conflict began to echo faintly from the eastern border, shouts and the clash of weapons, carrying faintly on the night wind. Luna paced restlessly near the healing wing's entrance, her pups gathered safely in a basket nearby, her amber eyes fixed anxiously toward the distant sounds of battle. Hours passed in tense uncertainty before the first wounded warriors began arriving, carried in by their companions, injuries ranging from minor cuts to more serious wounds requiring immediate attention. Alira worked tirelessly alongside Morella and the other healers, cleaning wounds, applying pressure to stop bleeding, offering quiet words of comfort to frightened, injured fighters. As the night wore on, reports trickled in from the border. Dreymore's forces had pushed hard initially, testing the Voss defenses with aggressive intensity, but Kaelin's warriors, better prepared and defending familiar territory, had held their ground firmly, pushing back each advance with disciplined precision. Near dawn, as exhaustion began weighing heavily on everyone within the healing wing, a warrior burst through the doors, his expression a mixture of relief and lingering tension. "The Alpha commands a temporary halt," he announced. "Dreymore has called for a pause in fighting. He wishes to negotiate terms directly with Alpha Voss." Alira's heart leapt with cautious hope, though worry still gnawed at her chest. "Is Kaelin unharmed?" "He took a minor wound to the shoulder," the warrior replied, "but nothing serious. He's already moving to meet with Dreymore's representative near the borderline." Relief flooded through Alira, though the underlying tension remained, uncertain what terms Corvin Dreymore might attempt to demand, and whether her presence would once again become the center of a dangerous negotiation. She glanced toward Luna, finding the wolf's anxious eyes fixed on her, clearly sensing her distress. "We need to know what happens next," Alira murmured, more to herself than to anyone else in the room, as the first pale light of dawn began creeping slowly across the horizon, promising answers, one way or another, before the day was through. Kaelin stood at the borderline as the sun rose fully over the horizon, his shoulder bandaged tightly beneath his torn shirt, his expression carefully composed, despite the exhaustion of a night spent in fierce, unrelenting combat. Across from him, flanked by a small group of warriors, stood Corvin Dreymore himself, a tall, broad man with cold, calculating eyes and a smile that never quite reached them. "Impressive resistance," Corvin said, his tone deceptively casual. "I hadn't expected the Voss pack to fight so fiercely over a single runaway woman." "She is not property to be reclaimed, Corvin," Kaelin replied evenly, his voice carrying a quiet authority that betrayed none of the fatigue weighing on his body. "She is a person under my protection, and I will defend that protection with everything my pack possesses." Corvin's smile thinned slightly, irritation flickering briefly behind his calculating gaze. "You misunderstand the situation, Voss. Alira belongs to my pack. She was meant to strengthen my bloodline, a duty she abandoned selfishly when she fled in the night like a common thief." "A duty," Kaelin repeated coldly, "that involved forcing an unwilling woman into bearing pups against her own wishes, purely to serve your ambitions. That is not duty, Corvin. That is cruelty dressed up in the language of obligation." Corvin's expression darkened, his composed mask slipping briefly to reveal the ruthless ambition beneath. "Careful, Voss. You speak of matters you understand nothing about." "I understand enough," Kaelin said firmly. "I understand that a woman fled your territory, terrified and starving, guarded only by a loyal wolf, willing to risk everything to protect her from further harm. I understand that whatever claim you believe you hold over her was built on threats and cruelty, not consent or genuine partnership. That is not a claim I recognize, nor one I will ever honor." Silence stretched between them, tension crackling in the cool morning air, as warriors on both sides watched their respective leaders carefully, waiting to see whether the fragile pause in fighting would hold or shatter entirely. You would risk further conflict, Corvin said slowly, over a woman who means nothing to your pack, who brings you no strategic advantage, no strengthened bloodline, nothing beyond the burden of her presence. She means something to me, Kalen said simply, his voice steady and unwavering. That is reason enough. Something shifted subtly in Corvin's expression at those words, calculation replacing simple frustration. I see, he said slowly. This is no longer merely a matter of principle for you, is it, Voss? You've grown attached. Kalen did not deny it, his silence answering the question clearly enough. Very well, Corvin said finally, a cold, calculating smile returning to his face. Perhaps we can reach an arrangement that satisfies us both. I will relinquish my claim over Illyria, formally and permanently, in exchange for a portion of your northern territory, the section bordering the river that has long been disputed between our packs. Kalen's jaw tightened, understanding immediately the trap being laid before him, an attempt to extract a valuable concession under the guise of resolving the conflict peacefully. Absolutely not, he said firmly. You have no legitimate claim over Illyria to relinquish in the first place, Corvin. And I will not reward cruelty with territory that has never rightfully belonged to your pack. Corvin's expression hardened, the thin veneer of civility finally cracking entirely. Then we return to conflict, Voss. And this time, I will not hold back the full strength of my forces. Then bring your full strength, Kalen replied, unflinching, his warriors behind him shifting subtly into readiness at his tone. But know this, Corvin. Every warrior you send against my borders will be met with equal resolve, and should this conflict escalate further, I will ensure that every neighboring pack learns precisely what kind of leader you truly are, a man who tortures and threatens the vulnerable, then wages war to reclaim the property he believes he's entitled to. Your reputation will not survive that truth. Corvin's eyes narrowed dangerously, weighing the threat carefully. Reputation among neighboring packs carried significant weight, alliances and trade agreements often resting on perceived honor and fair leadership. The prospect of being exposed as a cruel, manipulative alpha carried consequences far beyond a single border dispute. You would risk further bloodshed, Corvin said slowly, simply to protect your own reputation. Voss, framed as protecting hers? I would risk far more than that, to protect someone under my care, from a man who has already proven exactly what he is capable of. Kalen replied evenly. Withdraw your forces, Corvin. Permanently relinquish any claim over Illyria, and this conflict ends here, without further loss on either side. Continue forward, and you risk not only continued losses to your own forces, but the lasting condemnation of every pack who learns the truth of your actions. The tension stretched taut between them for a long, heavy moment, both alphas measuring the other's resolve carefully. Finally, Corvin's expression shifted, calculation winning out over wounded pride. Very well, he said stiffly, bitterness evident beneath his forced composure. I withdraw my claim, formally and permanently. Illyria is no longer bound to my pack in any capacity. And your forces withdraw from my borders immediately, Kalen added firmly, with assurance that no further aggression will follow. Corvin's jaw tightened, but he nodded curtly. Agreed. This matter is finished, Voss. But do not mistake this outcome for friendship between our packs going forward. I never expected friendship, Corvin, Kalen replied coldly. Only that you leave what is not rightfully yours in peace. With that, Corvin turned sharply, calling out orders to his warriors, and within the hour, Draymore forces began their retreat from the border, the immediate threat finally lifting from Voss territory. Kalen remained at the borderline until the last of Corvin's warriors disappeared from sight, ensuring the withdrawal was genuine before finally allowing himself to relax, exhaustion from the long night finally catching up with him fully. He made his way back toward the pack house slowly, his shoulder aching with each step, his mind already turning toward the woman waiting anxiously within its walls, finally free from the shadow of cruelty that had haunted her for so long. As he crossed the threshold into the healing wing, Illyria looked up immediately from her work, relief and worry both flooding her expression the moment she saw him. She rushed forward without hesitation, stopping just short of embracing him, uncertain suddenly of the boundary between them despite the intimacy of the previous night's conversation. You're hurt, she said softly, noticing the bandage visible beneath his torn shirt. It's nothing serious, Kaelin assured her gently, and it was worth every bit of the cost. What happened? She asked, searching his face anxiously. Is it over? It's over, Kaelin confirmed, relief evident in his own tired voice. Corvin has withdrawn his claim over you, permanently. His forces are already retreating from our borders. You're free, Alira. Truly free. For the first time and longer than either of us likely realized. Alira's eyes filled with tears, overwhelming relief crashing over her, as the weight of years of fear and uncertainty finally began to lift from her shoulders. Free, she repeated softly, as though testing the unfamiliar weight of the word. Free, Kaelin confirmed gently, reaching out to brush a stray tear from her cheek with careful tenderness. No one will ever force you into anything against your will again, Alira, not while I have breath left to prevent it. Overwhelmed, Alira finally closed the remaining distance between them, wrapping her arms around him carefully, mindful of his injured shoulder, and Kaelin embraced her in return without hesitation, the fierce protectiveness he had carried since the very first night finding her in that stable, finally settling into something deeper, something neither of them any longer wished to deny. In the weeks following Corvin's withdrawal, the Voss pack settled gradually back into its familiar rhythms, though something fundamental had shifted within its walls, a quiet transformation that everyone from the newest recruit to Kaelin's most senior advisors seemed to notice. Alira no longer moved through the pack house as a guarded stranger, uncertain of her welcome. She had become, gradually and naturally, an integral part of the community, spending her mornings assisting Mirella in the healing wing, her afternoons tending the garden alongside Luna and the growing pups, and her evenings increasingly in Kaelin's company, sharing quiet conversations that stretched long into the night. Garrick, once wary of her presence, had come to respect her quiet resilience, particularly after witnessing her tireless work tending wounded warriors during the tense days of conflict with Draymore. She has more strength than most warriors I've trained, he admitted to Kaelin one evening, watching Alira patiently teach one of the younger pack members proper bandaging technique. You were right to protect her, Alpha, whatever the cost might have been. Kaelin said nothing in response, simply smiling faintly as he watched Alira across the training grounds, her laughter carrying softly on the evening breeze as Luna's pups tumbled playfully around her feet, now nearly old enough to be weaned entirely from their mother's care. That evening, Kaelin found Alira in the garden, sitting quietly on the same bench where they had first begun to truly know one another weeks earlier, watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant shades of gold and crimson. May I join you? He asked softly. She smiled, shifting slightly to make room beside her. Always. He settled beside her, comfortable silence stretching between them for a long while as they watched the pups play nearby. Luna, resting nearby, with the contented patience of a mother whose family had finally found safety and stability. I've been thinking, Kaelin said finally, breaking the silence carefully. About what? About you, he admitted, turning to face her fully. About everything you've survived, everything you've overcome, and how remarkably you've woven yourself into this pack despite everything you've endured. I've watched you these past weeks, Alira, and I find myself more certain with each passing day of something I've felt since that very first night I found you sleeping in the stable. Alira's breath caught, her heart racing as she searched his face carefully, hardly daring to hope for the words she suspected were coming. What is that? She asked softly. That you mean far more to me than simply someone under my protection, Kaelin said, his voice steady despite the vulnerability evident in his eyes. I care for you deeply, Alira. Not out of obligation, not out of pity for what you've survived, but because of who you are, the strength and kindness and resilience I've witnessed in you every single day since you arrived here. Tears glistened in Alira's eyes, overwhelming emotion rising within her chest at his sincere, unguarded confession. Kaelin, she whispered softly, after everything I've survived, I never believed I would find someone who saw me as more than a means to an end, someone who valued my choices and my safety above all else. You deserve nothing less, Kaelin said firmly, reaching out gently to take her hand in his. And I intend to spend as long as you'll allow me, proving that to you, Alira, for as long as it takes for you to fully believe it. I already believe it, Alira said softly, her fingers tightening gently around his. I've believed it for weeks now, though I was too afraid to acknowledge it, afraid that trusting these feelings might somehow prove foolish, might lead to more pain. It won't, Kaelin promised gently. I give you my word, Illyra, for whatever it's worth. It's worth everything, she whispered, leaning slightly closer to him, the growing warmth between them finally allowed to blossom fully into the open, after weeks of careful, cautious restraint. As the last light of sunset faded gently into the soft glow of early evening stars, Kaelin leaned forward slowly, giving Illyra every opportunity to pull away if she wished, and when she did not, their lips finally met in a gentle, tender kiss that spoke more clearly than any words could of the quiet, steady bond that had grown steadily between them since that fateful night in the old stable. When they finally parted, Illyra rested her forehead gently against his, a soft, genuine smile spreading across her face, the first truly unguarded happiness Kaelin had witnessed from her since her arrival. I never imagined, she murmured softly, that fleeing everything I knew would lead me somewhere I could finally call home. This is your home now, Illyra, Kaelin said gently, cupping her face tenderly in his hands. For as long as you wish it to be, and I hope, he added softly, that you'll allow me to be part of that home alongside you, for as long as you'll have me. Always, Illyra whispered, her voice thick with emotion. I want that always, Kaelin. Nearby, Luna lifted her head briefly from where she rested with her pups, her amber eyes settling thoughtfully on the two figures embracing quietly in the fading evening light, before she lowered her head again contentedly, as though satisfied that the long, difficult journey that had brought her and Illyra to this place had finally led them somewhere safe, somewhere worth staying. The pups tumbled together nearby, unaware of the significance of the moment unfolding just beyond their playful attention, their small lives already woven inseparably into the fabric of a pack that had welcomed them, and the two women who loved them, with open arms and unwavering loyalty. As the stars fully emerged overhead, scattering brilliant light across the quiet garden, Kaelin and Illyra remained together on that same simple bench where their friendship had first begun to deepen into something far greater, the weight of every hardship they had each carried, finally easing into the quiet, steady peace of two hearts that had, against every obstacle placed before them, found their way safely home to one another. Months passed, and the Voss pack thrived under the steady partnership that had grown between Kaelin and Illyra, their bond deepening with each passing season into something the entire pack had come to recognize and celebrate. Illyra had become an invaluable presence within the community, her work alongside Morella in the healing wing, earning her the genuine respect and affection of pack members, who had once regarded her with cautious uncertainty. Children ran to greet her eagerly whenever she crossed the training grounds, drawn to her warmth and gentle patience, while warriors who had once questioned Kaelin's decision to protect a stranger now spoke of her with unreserved admiration. Luna's pups had grown remarkably over the months, 4 strong, healthy young wolves who roamed the pack grounds freely, cherished by the entire community as living symbols of the loyalty and resilience that had brought Illyra safely to her new home. Luna herself remained close to Illyra always, though she had also grown comfortable within the wider pack, often seen resting peacefully near Kaelin's study or trotting alongside pack members during their daily routines, fully accepted as a cherished member of the Voss family. On a warm afternoon in early autumn, the entire pack gathered in the wide central courtyard of the estate, drawn together by an announcement Kaelin had promised would be significant. Illyra stood beside him at the front of the gathered crowd, her heart racing with anticipation, though she had a fairly good idea of what was coming. Kaelin turned to face her fully, taking both her hands gently in his expression warm, with a certainty that had only grown stronger with every passing month they had spent together. Illyra, he began, his voice carrying clearly across the quiet courtyard. From the moment I found you in that old stable, exhausted and afraid, guarded so fiercely by a loyal companion who refused to leave your side, I knew there was something extraordinary about you. Over these past months, you have shown me, and this entire pack, exactly what true strength and resilience looks like. Illyra's eyes glistened with emotion as he continued, the gathered pack watching with warm anticipation, many already suspecting what was about to unfold. You came to us with nothing, Kaelin continued softly, having survived cruelty that would have broken many others entirely, and yet you rebuilt yourself, found purpose and belonging among us, and in doing so, taught all of us the true meaning of resilience and grace. I love you, Alira, more deeply than I ever believed possible, and I am asking you now, in front of the pack that has come to love and respect you as much as I do, to become my mate, my equal partner, for the rest of our lives together." He knelt slowly before her, producing a simple, elegant ring crafted from silver, and the courtyard fell into hushed, anticipatory silence as Alira stared down at him, tears finally spilling freely down her cheeks. "Yes," she said softly, her voice trembling with overwhelming joy. "Yes, Kaylin, always yes." The courtyard erupted into joyful cheers as Kaylin rose, sliding the ring gently onto her finger before pulling her into a warm, tender embrace. The pack around them celebrating with genuine warmth and happiness for the union that had grown from such an unlikely, extraordinary beginning. Luna, watching from nearby with her 4 grown pups gathered around her, let out a soft, satisfied sound, as though she too understood the significance of the moment unfolding before her, the culmination of a long, difficult journey that had finally led to safety, belonging, and genuine happiness for the woman she had protected so fiercely from the very beginning. That evening, as the celebration continued late into the night, with music and laughter filling the pack house, Alira slipped away briefly to the quiet garden where so much of her healing had taken place, Luna following faithfully at her side as always. She sat on the familiar bench, gazing up at the stars scattered brilliantly across the clear night sky, her heart full in a way she had never believed possible after everything she had survived. Kaylin found her there a short while later, settling beside her with a warm smile. "Regretting saying yes already?" he teased gently. "Never." Alira laughed softly, leaning her head against his shoulder. "I was just thinking about everything that led me here. The village I lost, the cruelty I survived, the long nights running with nothing but Luna beside me for protection. It feels almost impossible now, looking back, that such a difficult road led me somewhere this wonderful."
"Sometimes," Kaylin said softly, wrapping an arm gently around her shoulders, "the most difficult roads lead us exactly where we're meant to be, even when we can't see it during the journey itself."
Alira smiled, turning to press a gentle kiss against his cheek. "I'm grateful every single day that my road led me to that old stable, and to you." "As am I," Kaylin replied warmly, "more grateful than words can properly express." They sat together quietly beneath the stars, Luna resting contentedly at their feet, her pups playing nearby in the soft moonlight, the entire scene a picture of the peace and belonging that had once seemed impossibly out of reach for a woman who had spent so long running from cruelty and fear. In the years that followed, the old stable where Kaylin had first discovered Alira sleeping, guarded so fiercely by a loyal, pregnant wolf, remained standing on the estate grounds, gently restored, and preserved as a quiet symbol of where their extraordinary story had begun. Pack members would often pass by it with quiet smiles, remembering the remarkable tale of how their alpha had found love and loyalty in the most unexpected of places, and how a woman who had once known only cruelty and fear had found, at last, a home built on genuine kindness, unwavering protection, and enduring love. And Luna, the loyal, remarkable wolf who had guarded Alira through her darkest days, lived out her years, surrounded by her growing family, and the pack that had welcomed her so completely, a living testament to the loyalty and resilience that had brought 2 hearts together against every obstacle placed in their path. Their story, one of survival, courage, and the unexpected gift of finding home in the most unlikely of places, became a cherished legend within the Voss pack for generations to come, a reminder that even the darkest roads can lead, eventually, to light.